I still remember the sound of his voice that night, low, steady, and filled with something I couldn't name. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pity. It was recognition. When he looked at me across that grand marble hallway, his eyes softened, as if he'd just solved a mystery he'd been chasing for years. And then he said, quietly, "I should have known it was you." My heart stopped. I was standing there, in my worn cleaner's uniform, holding a silver tray I didn't belong near, feeling like the walls were closing in. How could a man like him know someone like me? But maybe I should start from the beginning. Back then, my life was simple, painfully simple. I lived in a small 2-room apartment at the edge of the city with my 6-year-old son, Noah. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise to make him breakfast. Toast, scrambled eggs if I could afford them, and 1 banana split between us. He never complained. He'd just smile with those sleepy eyes and say, "It's okay, Mom. I like it better this way." I'd smile back, pretending that I believed him. After dropping him off at the small neighborhood school, I'd rush to my part-time cleaning jobs, offices, hotels, sometimes private homes. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept a roof over our heads and enough heat in the winter to keep Noah's little hands warm. People rarely noticed me. To most, I was invisible, a background figure who made things neat again. And honestly, I preferred it that way. After everything that had happened in my past, anonymity was a kind of safety. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table after dropping Noah off, staring at the list of unpaid bills. The numbers blurred together until I couldn't tell one from another. All I knew was that something had to give. That's when my phone buzzed, a message from one of the cleaning agencies I worked with. Urgent placement, private residence, high pay, confidential client. Are you available today? I hesitated. Private residence, confidential client, high pay. It sounded almost too good. But when you're desperate, too good starts to sound like a blessing. I typed back, "Yes, I can start immediately." 2 hours later, I was standing at the iron gates of a mansion I'd only ever seen in magazines. The property stretched farther than I could see, a long driveway lined with trimmed hedges, a fountain at the center glimmering like glass under the sun. For a moment, I almost turned back. I didn't belong here. The reflection of my faded jacket and tired eyes in the polished gate seemed to mock me. But then I thought of Noah, his small backpack, his uneven handwriting on his school papers, his quiet hope when he asked if we'd ever go on vacation like other kids. So I took a deep breath, straightened my uniform, and pressed the intercom. A woman's voice answered, cool, efficient. "Yes?" "Good morning," I said, trying to sound professional. "I'm from the agency, here for the cleaning position." There was a short pause, then a click as the gates opened. The inside of the mansion felt like another world. Marble floors so clean they mirrored the chandeliers, walls filled with art I couldn't name but felt drawn to. A housekeeper, older, strict-looking, greeted me and handed me a clipboard. "You'll be assigned to the East Wing. Keep your head down, do your work, and stay out of sight. The owner doesn't like disruptions." The owner. The word carried weight, as if everyone here lived in quiet orbit around him. I nodded, understood. And so I began. For hours I dusted furniture worth more than my apartment, polished glass stair rails that sparkled like diamonds, and changed linens that smelled faintly of cedar and luxury. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of life beyond my cleaning cloth, voices in another room, the sound of laughter, a piano playing somewhere upstairs, but I never saw him until I did. It was near evening when I finished in the study. The sun was melting into gold through the tall windows, and I stood on my toes, wiping the last streak off the glass. That's when I heard footsteps. Confident, unhurried. I turned, expecting the housekeeper, but it wasn't her. He stood in the doorway, tall, immaculate, wearing a crisp suit that seemed sculpted to his frame. Everything about him spoke of quiet authority. For a moment, neither of us said a word. He just looked at me, really looked, as if trying to remember where he'd seen me before. And in that instant, I felt something shift. It wasn't fear. It wasn't recognition. It was something else. He finally spoke, his tone low but polite. "You must be the new cleaner." "Yes, sir," I said quickly, lowering my eyes. "I'll be done here in a moment." He didn't leave. Instead, he walked closer, his gaze lingering, not in a cruel way, but in a curious one. "Have we met before?" The question caught me off guard. My heart thudded in my chest. I shook my head. "No, sir, I don't believe so." He studied me for another moment before giving a faint smile. "Strange. You remind me of someone I once knew." And then he walked away, leaving me standing there trembling, not from fear, but from something I couldn't explain. As I gathered my things, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Why did he look at me that way? As if my face carried a secret even I didn't remember. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he'd looked at me, not like an employer looks at his cleaner, but like someone seeing a ghost from another life. It shouldn't have mattered. I was just one of the staff, here to clean and disappear quietly. But his question, "Have we met before?" echoed in my mind long after I left the mansion gates. I replayed it over and over as I rode the bus home, the city lights flickering across my reflection in the window. There was something unsettling about his tone, gentle but probing, like he'd glimpsed a memory he couldn't place. I shook it off, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Billionaires don't remember people like me. When I got home, Noah was already in bed. Mrs. Alvarez, our elderly neighbor who sometimes watched him after school, smiled when she saw me. "You look tired, Carita. Long day?" I nodded, slipping off my shoes. "A new job, big house, bigger floors." She chuckled softly, handing me a small plate of empanadas she'd saved for me. "You work too hard, but I can see something in your eyes tonight. Something new." "New?" I laughed quietly. "You mean exhaustion?" But she just winked. "No, something else, like maybe life's about to change." I didn't want to admit how those words made my heart skip. Later, lying beside Noah, I listened to his soft breathing and stared at the cracked ceiling. For the first time in months, I felt something that almost resembled hope. The pay from this job, if it lasted, could mean stability, a fresh start, maybe even enough to buy Noah a proper winter coat this year. But under that fragile hope was a whisper of unease. Because the man who owned that mansion, Daniel Hart, was more than just a wealthy client. I hadn't realized it until I got home and looked him up. The internet was full of him. Business articles, charity galas, photos where he stood beside politicians and movie stars. He was one of those rare people who seemed untouchable, the kind of man who built empires while others like me cleaned their hallways. I stared at his picture for a long time, wondering why his face felt familiar. Something about his eyes, calm but tired, almost melancholic, tugged at a thread in my memory I couldn't quite pull free. The next morning, the mansion was quiet when I arrived. A soft drizzle misted the garden, and the smell of rain on marble filled the air. I slipped through the side entrance where the staff clocked in. "Back again?" the housekeeper asked, arching a brow. "Yes, ma'am. You said to report at 8. She handed me a fresh set of linens and a small bucket of supplies. "The master's study and the east bedroom today. Don't linger. He has meetings later." I nodded, grateful for the routine. Still, as I worked, I couldn't help but notice the details of the place. The framed photographs of a younger Daniel standing with an older man who must have been his father. The faint smell of tobacco in the library, where a half-burned cigar rested in a crystal tray. The house was immaculate, yet strangely hollow. Everything gleamed, but nothing felt lived in. Around noon, I took a short break in the small staff kitchen. The rain had turned heavier outside, pattering softly against the glass. That's when I heard footsteps again, steady, unmistakable. Before I could turn, his voice filled the doorway. "You're early today." I nearly dropped my cup. He was leaning casually against the doorframe, holding a mug of coffee. The sleeves of his white shirt were rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like they'd never known rest. "I was told to start in the study," I stammered. He nodded, stepping closer. "Good. You're thorough. Most people don't last long here." I smiled awkwardly. "I'm used to hard work." His eyes softened again, that same searching expression as before. "You know, I've met thousands of people through work, but there's something about you." I froze, unsure how to respond. He shook his head, almost to himself. "Forgive me. I shouldn't say that. You just remind me of someone I lost a long time ago." The sincerity in his voice took me by surprise. For a man who seemed so composed, his eyes betrayed a kind of sorrow I couldn't ignore. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That must have been hard." He gave a faint smile. "It was. But life has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it?" Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression tightening. "Excuse me." And just like that, he was gone again, leaving me with a heart beating far too fast and a question I couldn't shake. Who was the woman I reminded him of? That evening, when I returned home, Noah was sitting at the table coloring a picture. He held it up proudly, a drawing of a big house with a garden and 2 stick figures holding hands. "That's you and me, Mommy," he said, grinning. "And that's our new house when we're rich." I laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "Oh, sweetheart, we don't need to be rich. We just need each other." But as he looked up at me with that innocent hope, I felt a lump form in my throat. Because for the first time, I caught myself wondering, what if life really could change? The following days passed in quiet rhythm. Each morning, I'd clean, dust, polish, trying to stay unnoticed, though I always felt his presence somewhere in the house. Sometimes, I'd hear his voice from his office, calm and precise. Other times, I'd catch a glimpse of him walking through the hallways, deep in thought. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention. It was something he carried naturally, like gravity. Even the staff spoke his name with a mixture of fear and admiration. Still, I noticed small things that others didn't. The way he paused before looking at old photos, or how he sometimes lingered by the grand piano but never played. He seemed lonely, in a way that wealth couldn't fix. And maybe that's why I began to care, even though I knew I shouldn't. One afternoon, I was cleaning the study again when I accidentally knocked over a small stack of folders. As I crouched to pick them up, a photograph slipped out from between the pages. It was old, faded at the edges. A younger Daniel, smiling beside a woman with long hair and bright, hopeful eyes. She looked almost like me. My breath caught. The resemblance was uncanny. Same hair color, same dimple in the left cheek, even the same tilt of the smile. Before I could think, I heard his voice behind me. You found it. I froze, the photo trembling in my hand. That was someone I once loved, he said quietly, before everything changed. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. For the first time, I saw something raw and unguarded in them, a memory that hadn't healed. I wanted to speak, to ask, to understand, but before I could, he said something that made my heart stop. You really do look just like her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, charged with something I didn't understand. His words echoed in my mind like a whisper I couldn't escape. You really do look just like her. I lowered my gaze to the photograph again. The woman in it had the same dark hair, the same tired kindness in her eyes. But there was something else, a warmth in her smile, the kind of light that only exists before life teaches you loss. I wanted to ask who she was, but my throat felt tight. Instead, I placed the photograph gently on his desk and stepped back. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to intrude. He didn't answer at first. His eyes were distant, like he was somewhere far away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. No, it's not your fault. I shouldn't have left it there. He reached for the picture, tracing his thumb along the woman's face. She was my fiancée, he said quietly, but she passed away years ago, a car accident. The words hung in the air. Even though he spoke them calmly, there was a kind of ache beneath the surface, the kind that time doesn't erase, only buries deeper. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it more than I expected to. He gave a small nod, still staring at the photo. You remind me of her, not just the way you look, but your presence, the way you move. It's strange, isn't it? How life can bring back echoes of the past. I didn't know what to say. Every instinct told me to keep distance, to stay in my role and leave his memories untouched. But a part of me, the part that knew pain and silence too well, wanted to understand. So I asked quietly, what was her name? He smiled faintly. Elena. Elena. The name felt. And for reasons I couldn't explain, it felt familiar. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph, the woman's face, her smile, and Daniel's eyes when he looked at her. There was something haunting about it all. It wasn't just that she looked like me, it was that she felt like me. Something in her expression, that mix of strength and sadness, mirrored everything I'd been carrying for years. Maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe it was all coincidence. Still, I found myself wondering about Daniel, the man behind the name and fortune. He didn't seem like the type of billionaire the world made him out to be. There was a quiet depth to him, a loneliness that clung to the edges of his confidence. And I knew that feeling too well. The next few days, I tried to focus on work. I polished, scrubbed, and folded like my life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. The paycheck from this job meant "sir." But every time I passed his study or caught the faint sound of piano keys drifting from the other side of the house, my thoughts betrayed me. I'd remember his voice when he said her name, Elena, and that strange flicker in his eyes when he looked at me. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me felt drawn to him. Not in the foolish fairy tale way I used to imagine love. It was something quieter. Curiosity, empathy, the ache of two people carrying invisible scars. One afternoon, the housekeeper called me aside. Mr. Hart has requested that you assist in organizing his library tomorrow. Be punctual. He's very particular about it. My stomach fluttered. It was the first time he'd personally asked for me. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous about the work. I'd organized dozens of rooms before. But because I couldn't stop wondering why. Why me? Out the next morning, I arrived early. The mansion was unusually quiet. Rain drizzled against the tall windows again. A soft, rhythmic sound that made everything feel distant and suspended in time. Daniel was already in the library when I entered. He stood by the window, staring out into the gray garden. "You're early," he said without turning. "I like to start before the day gets busy." He turned then, offering a faint smile. "I like that about you. You take things seriously." I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded and began sorting the books. For the first half hour, silence filled the room. He worked at his desk while I organized shelves, careful not to disturb him. But I could feel his gaze every now and then, quiet, thoughtful, studying me not as an employer, but as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Eventually, he broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like life gives you second chances, even when you don't deserve them?" I turned slowly. "I don't know. Maybe. Sometimes it feels like life gives us echoes instead, reminders of what we lost." He looked at me then, really looked, the way he had the first day we met. And for a fleeting second, I thought he might say something more. But instead he just nodded, as if my words confirmed something he'd already believed. Hours passed quietly. By the time I finished, the rain had stopped, and the golden afternoon light had begun to creep through the windows. He thanked me politely and handed me a sealed envelope. "For your extra time," he said. "You've done excellent work." I hesitated before taking it. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "Consider it appreciation." Our fingers brushed for a moment as he passed the envelope, and it startled me how electric the touch felt, uninvited, brief, but impossible to ignore. I looked up quickly, but his expression was unreadable. He turned back toward the window, hands in his pockets. "You should get home before the storm starts again." I nodded, tucking the envelope into my bag. But as I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "Miss, may I ask?" I turned. "Of course." He hesitated. "You said your name was—" "Clara," I replied. He repeated it under his breath. "Clara." Like he was testing how it felt to say it. Then, softly, "Strange, it suits you. But it still feels like I've heard it before." Outside, the rain began again, gentle, persistent. As I walked down the long driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Somehow, I knew our paths weren't crossing by accident, and deep down, part of me feared and hoped that the truth about who I really was might not stay hidden forever. The following week felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes right before something changes. Life slipped back into its quiet rhythm, mornings with Noah, long hours at the mansion, and evenings spent in our tiny kitchen, cooking whatever we could afford. Sometimes, as I watched Noah draw at the table, I'd think about how simple our life was and how fragile. Every piece of it rested on a delicate balance. My job, his school, our rent. One mistake, one missed payment, and everything could fall apart. But for now, we were okay. We had warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that made the struggles bearable. My mornings started before the sun. I'd wake to the soft hum of the city coming alive, make coffee so thin you could almost see through it, and pack Noah's lunch, peanut butter sandwiches, and the small apple slices he liked so much. He'd sit at the table, his legs swinging under the chair, still half asleep. "Do you have to work again tonight, Mommy?" "Maybe just a little," I'd say, brushing his hair back. "But I'll be home before you sleep." He'd nod, pretending not to be disappointed, and I'd kiss his forehead before hurrying to catch the bus. Sometimes, as I looked at him, I'd wonder if he remembered the days before all this, before his father left, before I lost everything I thought I could count on. But Noah rarely asked about the past. He was too busy dreaming about the future. The mansion became my second world, one so different from my own that it almost felt like stepping into a dream each morning. I learned the rhythm of its silence, the faint ticking of the clock in the grand hall, the way sunlight moved slowly across the marble floors, the quiet echoes of footsteps that always made me pause. Daniel's presence lingered everywhere, even when he wasn't home. He had a way of filling the house without speaking, his books left open on the desk, the faint scent of cedar and cologne near the staircase, the notes of a piano piece left half-finished in the music room. Sometimes, I'd find myself wondering about him more than I should. Not as my employer, but as a man. What kind of life did he live when the cameras weren't watching? Did he ever feel as lonely as I did? One afternoon, while cleaning the terrace, I saw him outside for the first time since our conversation in the library. He was standing near the garden, his jacket draped over one shoulder, speaking quietly on the phone. His voice carried across the wind, calm, deliberate, like someone who never needed to raise it to be heard. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but one sentence caught my attention. "No, I'm not looking for anyone new. Some things can't be replaced." He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and turned. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. He didn't smile, but something flickered there. Recognition, perhaps, or just curiosity. Then he nodded slightly before walking away. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. That night, I tried to focus on Noah's stories about school, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment in the garden. Why did his words, "Some things can't be replaced," sound like they were meant for more than the person on the phone? Before bed, I checked my phone and saw a message from the agency. "Client requests same cleaner for the next month. Direct arrangement approved." That client was Daniel Hart. I stared at the message for a long time. It shouldn't have mattered. A stable month of work was a gift. But part of me knew this wasn't just a job anymore. Something unseen was beginning to unfold. The next few days felt different. There was a quiet awareness between us now, like we were both pretending not to notice something we already felt. He'd greet me in passing, sometimes with a polite smile, sometimes with a thoughtful silence. He never overstepped, never spoke too much, but every word he did say seemed to linger. One morning he found me polishing the piano in the music room. "You play?" he asked suddenly. I looked up, startled. "No, sir, not really. I used to, a little, when I was younger." "You can call me Daniel," he said almost absently. "And you should play again. It's a beautiful thing to forget." He said it so softly I almost missed it. Then he smiled, not the charming kind you see in magazines, but something smaller, genuine, private. It was the kind of smile that stays with you long after you've looked away. Later that day, while dusting the shelves, I heard the faint sound of the piano. I paused in the hallway and realized he was playing, slow, careful notes that filled the air with a sadness I couldn't name. I stood there, hidden behind the doorway, listening. The melody carried something familiar, a longing, a tenderness that felt too close to my own heart. And in that moment, I understood something. For all his wealth and success, Daniel Hart was a man haunted by love lost, and maybe by the fear of feeling it again. That evening, I walked Noah home from school through the narrow streets of our neighborhood. He held my hand tightly, skipping ahead to avoid puddles from the rain earlier. "Mommy," he said suddenly, "if people are rich, does that mean they're happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "Because my teacher says money can't buy happiness. But I think if we had more money, you wouldn't have to work so much." I smiled sadly. "Maybe happiness isn't about what we have, baby. Maybe it's about who we have." He thought about it for a moment, then squeezed my hand. "Then we're already rich." His words warmed me in a way I didn't expect. And yet somewhere deep inside, I felt a shift, a sense that life was slowly opening a door I hadn't dared to touch in years. That night, after putting Noah to bed, I found myself sketching again for the first time in months. The pencil felt strange in my hand, but once it moved, it didn't stop. Lines turned into shapes. A dress, elegant but simple. Something soft, timeless. Without meaning to, I realized I was designing for someone. Someone who'd once said, "You remind me of her." I set the pencil down, my heart racing. Something inside me had awakened, something I thought was gone for good. As I turned off the lamp, a single thought filled my mind, quiet but undeniable. I don't know where this path will lead, but I can feel it. My life is changing. And though I didn't know it then, I was already standing at the edge of a love story that would test everything I thought I knew about who I was and who he truly was. A few days later, Daniel asked if I could stay late to help prepare for a private dinner. It wasn't unusual. His schedule often changed last minute, but something in his tone made me pause. "It's just a few guests," he said, standing in the doorway of his study. "I trust you more than the agency's replacements." The words surprised me. "Of course, mister." I caught myself. "Of course, Daniel." He smiled faintly. "Thank you, Clara." The way he said my name, slow, deliberate, carried a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. I told myself not to read into it, but the truth was, that night, I wanted to look a little nicer than usual. Not for him, exactly, but because for the first time in years, I wanted to feel seen. I arrived at the mansion just before sunset. The golden light spilled across the wide marble floors, making everything glow. The chandeliers, the framed paintings, even the soft ripples of the indoor fountain. Daniel was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, uncorking a bottle of wine. The sight startled me. He looked nothing like the distant businessman I'd first met. "You cook?" I asked before I could stop myself. He chuckled. "Sometimes. My mother used to say that real success means knowing how to feed yourself." There was something so casual, so human in that moment, that I almost forgot who he was. A man who owned this mansion, who could buy and sell things. "She sounds like she was wise," I said softly. He nodded, his eyes distant. "She was. She also said I'd never survive long without her. I think she was right about that, too." For a second, the air felt heavy, not awkward, but honest. Then he cleared his throat and gestured toward the table. "Would you help me set this up?" As I laid out the plates and polished the silverware, Daniel adjusted the candles, his movements unhurried. Outside, the sky turned to a deep, bruised orange, fading slowly into violet. I hadn't realized how long we'd been talking until the doorbell rang. A group of sharply dressed people entered. Business associates, I guessed. Their laughter filled the room, polished and practiced. One woman, tall, elegant, the kind of person who seemed born into luxury, leaned in close to Daniel. Her perfume was sharp, like winter roses. "You've been hiding, Daniel," she teased. "We were starting to think you'd forgotten how to socialize." "I've been busy," he said with a polite smile. "Work never ends." Their conversation flowed easily, but his eyes drifted, for a moment, toward where I stood near the kitchen entrance. Just a glance, but it was enough to make my heart skip. The dinner went on for hours. I stayed quiet, refilling glasses, clearing plates, pretending not to notice when Daniel's gaze found me again and again, quick, unguarded, like he wasn't supposed to look. Later, as the guests prepared to leave, the elegant woman placed a hand on his arm. "You're still impossible to reach," she said, half joking. "Maybe that's why people chase you." He laughed softly but didn't reply. When the door finally closed behind him, the house fell silent again, the kind of silence that feels almost alive. Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You must be exhausted. I'm sorry that ran so late." "It's okay," I said, stacking the plates. They seemed important. He hesitated. Important, maybe. Meaningful, not anymore. He said it so quietly that I almost didn't hear it. Then he looked at me, really looked, and for a moment, there was no employer or employee, no mansion or uniform, just two people, both tired of pretending. When I finally left, the air outside was cool and smelled of rain. As I walked toward the bus stop, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not the billionaire, not the man in the newspapers, but the one who cooked dinner with me and spoke of his mother like she was still in the room. It scared me, how easily my thoughts went there. I had no right to think of him that way, but the truth was, I already did. The next day, I tried to shake it off, to remind myself of reality. Bills needed paying, Noah's shoes were too small, and the washing machine had finally died. There wasn't room in my life for fairy tales. Still, as I walked through the mansion halls, I couldn't help but notice the details that now felt familiar. The faint scratches on the piano, the way the morning light hit the staircase, even the rhythm of Daniel's footsteps as he crossed the floor above me. I was beginning to know the sound of his world, and that scared me more than anything. That afternoon, I was dusting the library shelves when he walked in, holding a stack of papers. "You're early today," I said without looking up. "Couldn't focus at the office," he admitted. "It's quieter here." He placed the papers on the desk and leaned against it, watching me work for a moment. "You're not like the others," he said finally. I froze. The others? People who come here. They act like this house means something. You don't. I smiled faintly. Maybe because it doesn't. It's beautiful, yes, but it's still just walls and floors. What matters is who lives inside. He looked at me, really looked, and something softened in his expression. That's exactly what my mother used to say. There was silence after that, but not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that lets two people breathe in the same truth. As I left the room, I heard him call my name. "Clara?" I turned. "Do you ever think about starting over?" The question hit deeper than he probably meant it to. "Every day," I said quietly. He nodded slowly, like he understood. Then he smiled, small, almost shy. "Good night, Clara. Good night, Daniel." That night, as I lay in bed beside Noah, watching his tiny chest rise and fall, I couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in my mind. "Do you ever think about starting over?" Maybe he had no idea how much that question meant to someone like me, someone who'd spent years just surviving. I turned to the window. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel tired. I felt alive. Something was shifting between us, something I didn't dare name yet. The following morning, when I arrived at the mansion, the housekeeper handed me a small envelope. "Mr. Hart asked me to give you this." Inside was a note, written in clean, precise handwriting. "Clara, you once said you used to draw. I'd like to see that. If you're free tomorrow evening, meet me in the conservatory after hours. D." My hands trembled slightly as I folded the note. Was it just curiosity? Kindness? Something more? I didn't know, but I knew I would go, because whatever this was, it had already begun changing me. As I left the mansion that evening, the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting the world in gold and shadow. The wind brushed my hair, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and roses from the garden. And as I walked down the long stone path, one thought echoed in my mind. Quiet, certain, impossible to ignore. This is how it begins. Soon. I stood outside the glass doors of the conservatory the next evening, my pulse fluttering like I was a teenager again. The air was warm, filled with the faint scent of gardenia, and something sweet, maybe the promise of something I shouldn't want. Through the glass, I saw Daniel by the piano, sleeves rolled to his elbows again, hair slightly disheveled, the kind of imperfection that made him look real. Not the man from magazines or business interviews, but the one who smiled differently when no one else was watching. He turned when he heard me. "You came." "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted, holding the strap of my old, worn purse like it could protect me from what I was feeling. "I'm glad you did." The way he said it, simple, genuine, made my defenses tremble. The conservatory was nothing short of magical. Tall glass ceilings arched over a forest of orchids and vines, soft light spilling through leaves. It smelled like rain and old wood and memories. On a small table near the window, he had set out a sketchbook, a box of graphite pencils, and 2 glasses of wine. "You said you used to draw," he said softly. "I thought maybe you'd forgotten how to make time for yourself." I laughed under my breath. "You remember everything I say, don't you?" "Only the things worth remembering." I sat down slowly, touched by the gesture and terrified by what it meant. My fingers hovered above the paper, hesitant, rusty. It had been years since I'd drawn anything more than Noah's school doodles. "What should I draw?" I asked. "Whatever feels like home," he said. Those words made me pause. For a long moment, all I could think of was Noah, his laughter, his tiny hands covered in crayon smudges. So I began to draw a small boy chasing butterflies in a park. Daniel didn't interrupt. He watched quietly, occasionally sipping his wine. When I finished, I looked up shyly. "You're an artist," he said with a kind of wonder. "I used to be," I murmured. "Then life happened." He leaned closer, his voice low. Maybe life just paused for a while. Our eyes met. It felt like the air between us had changed, thicker, charged, and for the first time in years, I forgot about the clock, the bills. The rules that kept people like me away from people like him. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm that both frightened and exhilarated me. Daniel and I began to talk, really talk. Sometimes it was while I cleaned, other times when he joined me in the garden, pretending to check his emails while asking about my favorite books. He told me about his late parents, how he'd built his company from the ground up, how people expected him to be perfect, even when he felt hollow inside. "Everyone wants something from me," he confessed one afternoon. "Money, connections, favors. No one ever just listens." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sometimes silence said more than words could. He smiled then, like he could feel my understanding without explanation. "That's what I like about you, Clara. You don't fill the quiet." Those words stayed with me long after I left. But as our conversations deepened, I also felt the walls closing in around the truth I hadn't told him, the one that could ruin everything. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know why I'd taken this job, or what name I'd once had before my life fell apart. And each time he looked at me with that growing warmth, it cut deeper, because I knew, someday soon, he would find out. It started one afternoon when I was organizing old boxes in his study. I found a stack of photographs in a drawer, charity events, galas, newspaper clippings about his company's community foundation. And then one picture made my heart stop. It was from 6 years ago, a fundraiser for local youth art programs. In the background, half hidden, stood a young woman with paint on her hands and a shy smile. Me. Back then, I was teaching art at a public school under my maiden name, Clara Bennett. My stomach twisted. I'd forgotten that night, forgotten how Daniel's company had been one of the sponsors. What if he remembered? I quickly placed the photo back in the drawer, but the memory wouldn't let me go. That night, as I lay awake beside Noah, I could still see Daniel's face when he looked at me across the garden, and I couldn't stop asking myself, what happens when the past catches up? The next day, he called me to his office. "You seem distracted lately," he said, studying me. "Is everything all right?" I forced a smile. "Just tired, I guess." He frowned. "You work too much. When's the last time you did something for yourself?" I wanted to laugh. Myself? Every moment of my life revolved around keeping things together. Before I could answer, he stood, walked around the desk, and placed a small velvet box in front of me. "What's this?" "A gift," he said simply. "You mentioned your birthday was coming up." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, elegant but understated. "Daniel, I can't accept this." "You can," he said gently, "and you will." His tone wasn't commanding. It was almost pleading, like he wanted to give, not to impress, but to be understood. I looked at the bracelet, my reflection tiny in the polished surface. "Thank you," I whispered. "You deserve more than thank you," he said, almost to himself. The more kindness he showed me, the harder it became to carry my secret. I'd changed my name years ago to escape a life that had broken me, a marriage that ended in debt and shame. I'd promised myself never to look back. But if Daniel knew that I wasn't just a single mom, that I'd once been married to one of his company's former partners, the man who'd stolen from him and disappeared, I wasn't sure he'd ever look at me the same way. That truth hovered above everything between us, invisible but dangerous. One evening, as we stood in the garden after work, the air thick with the scent of jasmine, Daniel turned to me suddenly. "You ever feel like fate brings people together for a reason?" "I don't know," I said carefully. "Maybe it's just timing." "Maybe," he said softly. "Or maybe it's the universe's way of giving us another chance." Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, It felt like time stilled. But before I could answer, his phone buzzed. Sharp, urgent. He glanced at the screen, and his entire expression changed. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I have to take this." He turned away, voice low and tense as he spoke into the phone. Something about the way he said the words, "legal department," made my stomach twist. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call and the file it referred to would soon pull my past into the light. That night, I stood at my window, staring at the city lights. A storm was coming. I could feel it. And for the first time since I met Daniel, I wasn't sure if my heart was ready for what it might reveal. The next few days felt strange. Daniel wasn't avoiding me, not exactly, but something had shifted. He still greeted me in the mornings, still offered that soft, distracted smile, but there was a new distance in his eyes, a quiet weight behind them, like he was thinking about something he couldn't say. I told myself I was imagining it, that the phone call, the tension in his jaw, all of it was just business. But deep down, I knew better. That Friday, as I polished the banister, I overheard voices drifting from the study. His voice, firm, steady, and another man's, older and impatient. "Daniel, we're reopening the investigation. There are still gaps in the partnership accounts from the Bennett project." I froze, cloth in hand. Bennett, my maiden name. My breath caught in my throat as the older man continued. "We traced new activity from one of the associated accounts. It's possible someone connected to him resurfaced." Silence. Then Daniel's voice, low and measured. "Find out who. But don't make this public. Not yet." My knees nearly gave out. I turned and slipped quietly down the hall, heart hammering so hard it made my vision blur. He knew, or at least he was close to knowing. That evening, I could barely keep myself together. Every sound in the mansion made me flinch. Every word felt like it might unravel the fragile world I'd built. I thought about quitting, packing my things, taking Noah, and disappearing again. It wouldn't be the first time. But then I thought of Daniel, the way he'd looked at me when I laughed, the way he'd listened when no one else ever had, the man who saw past the uniform and found the person I'd tried to forget. If I left now, I'd never get to explain, so I stayed. And the next morning, I arrived early, determined to act normal, or at least try. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a warning. I was dusting the library shelves when I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, Daniel was standing there holding a file. His eyes met mine, unreadable, calm in a way that wasn't natural. "Clara," he said softly, "we need to talk." He gestured toward the sitting area. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, hands gripping my knees. He placed the file on the coffee table, its corner brushing against a cup of untouched coffee. "Yesterday," he began, "something came up at work. A name." My mouth went dry. A name I haven't heard in years. Bennett. I looked down at my hands, the name echoing like thunder inside me. "You used to be Clara Bennett, didn't you?" It wasn't an accusation, not yet. Just a question, quiet and careful. I swallowed hard. "Yes." He leaned back, exhaling slowly, eyes searching mine. "Why didn't you tell me?" I wanted to speak, to explain, but words tangled in my throat. Because I didn't think it mattered anymore, I whispered. Because I wanted to start over. His gaze softened for a moment, then hardened again, conflicted. Your husband, he was part of one of my company's projects. I know, I said quickly, and I had nothing to do with what he did. He fell silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. You knew this whole time? He asked finally. I didn't know you were the Daniel Hart from that case, I said. Not until I saw the photos in your study. By then, it was too late. Too late for what? I met his eyes. Too late to stop feeling something for you. The air between us felt heavy, almost suffocating. He stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the garden. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. Do you know what that project cost me, Clara? He said quietly. Not just money. People I trusted, my reputation. I stood too, clutching my hands together. I didn't know then. I swear, I left him before any of it happened. I had Noah, and I... His head turned slightly. Noah? My son. My voice cracked. He's 5 now. I've raised him alone. Finally, he said, almost to himself, you must have been terrified walking into this house. I was, I admitted, every single day. But you never looked at me like I was part of that past. You made me feel human again. That's when I saw it, the crack in his composure. His hand ran through his hair, his breath shaky. Clara, he murmured, I want to believe you. Then do. He turned back to face me, eyes bright with conflict. You have no idea how hard that is. Every instinct I have tells me not to trust anyone connected to what happened. And what does your heart tell you? I asked quietly. He didn't answer, not with words, but his 3 words that echoed louder than any goodbye. That night, as I sat by the window with Noah asleep in my lap, I looked at the bracelet he'd given me, still shining, still delicate. It felt heavier now, like a memory of something I might lose. I whispered to the dark. I should have told him sooner. But deep down, I knew the truth. Secrets never stay buried. And love, the kind that changes everything, never comes without a cost. The next morning, I received a message. Meet me at the mansion after hours. We need to finish this conversation. I stared at the words for a long time. My heart caught somewhere between hope and dread. I didn't know then that this meeting wouldn't just decide our future. It would also reveal the final truth about my past. The days that followed were a mixture of warmth and unease. We shared quiet breakfasts in the sunlit kitchen, laughter spilling over pancakes and spilled coffee. He would brush crumbs off my sleeve with the gentlest of touches, or lean close to whisper a thought about something trivial, a song, a book, a memory. Those moments felt intimate, grounding, as if the world outside didn't exist. But behind the soft smiles and playful nudges, there was a tension I couldn't ignore. Daniel's phone rang constantly. Messages piled up, and sometimes he would vanish for hours without explanation. Each time, I felt a pang, not jealousy exactly, but fear. I wanted to believe in the perfection of our stolen moments, but deep down, I already knew. Something was coming that could undo everything. It was a rainy Wednesday when the confrontation came. I had stayed late, tidying the library after a particularly exhausting day. The rain rattled against the windows, and the scent of wet earth seeped in, mingling with the faint aroma of his cologne. Daniel appeared suddenly, soaking, hair plastered to his forehead. His expression was unreadable. "Clara," he said, voice low and tense, "we need to talk now." My stomach sank. I knew instantly this wasn't about the small tensions or business problems I'd been trying to ignore. He held out a file, and I saw my heart lurch before I even touched it. "I found this," he said, almost accusingly, though his eyes searched mine for something else. Understanding, maybe even forgiveness. Inside were papers, bank statements, emails, remnants of the past I had tried to forget. My name, my former life, everything I had hidden. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, a tremor in his usually steady voice. I wanted to," I stammered, "but I needed to protect Noah and myself. I thought if I stayed hidden, it would all be safe." His hand shook as he placed the file on the table, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the billionaire mask, vulnerable, hurt, and uncertain. "Do you realize what this could mean?" he whispered. "To me, to everything I've built?" "I know," I said, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. "And I'm sorry. I never meant for it to come between us." He ran a hand over his face, his gaze dropping to the floor. Then he lifted it slowly, meeting my eyes again. "Clara, I don't know if I can just ignore this, but I can't stop thinking about you, about us." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the rain softened into a gentle drizzle. The room felt small, intimate, yet vast, filled with everything we hadn't said. I stepped closer, reaching for his hand. "I've never lied about my feelings," I whispered. "I care about you, more than I can say. And Noah, he cares about you too." He looked down at my hand, then slowly intertwined his fingers with mine. The contact was electric, grounding, terrifying. "Then tell me everything," he said. "No more secrets. I need to know who you are. All of it." I nodded, taking a deep breath. The story spilled out. The marriage, the betrayal, the debts, the move, my new name, the desperate struggle to survive for Noah. Every detail, every wound I had carried alone, I shared with him in a trembling voice. He listened, not a single word lost. His grip on my hand never faltered, even when I broke down. When I finished, silence stretched between us. "You should be angry," I whispered. "I would be angry if I were you." He shook his head slowly. "Anger doesn't fit here. Not when you've carried all of this alone. Not when you've been honest with me now." And in that moment, I realized the walls between us had crumbled, but the storm outside mirrored what was still to come, the world beyond this room, the past that would not remain silent. Over the next few days, our bond deepened even more. Daniel helped me with Noah, carrying him on his shoulders while I laughed from the garden path. We cooked dinner together in the kitchen, our hands brushing over chopping boards and simmering pots. He shared pieces of his life I hadn't seen before, late-night conversations about fears, failures, and the rare moments of happiness that didn't require status or wealth. We laughed. We fought over trivial things, teased each other endlessly, and held each other in moments when words failed. But always, there was that unspoken shadow, the knowledge that the past could return to shatter everything. I could see it in the slight hesitations in his smile, the way he avoided certain topics, the occasional furrowed brow late at night when I thought he was asleep. One evening, I found him standing on the balcony, rain dripping from the edges of the roof onto the garden below. "Daniel?" I asked softly. He turned, eyes reflecting the stormy sky. "Clara, do you ever feel like the past is a weight you can't shake, no matter how far you run?" I nodded, stepping closer. "Every day, but sometimes The right person can make you feel like it's lighter, like you can carry it together. He sighed, and for a moment, vulnerability softened the tension in his posture. I want that, he admitted. I want it with you. But I'm scared that it won't be enough, that the world outside will tear us apart. I reached out and took his hand, intertwining our fingers. Then we'll face it together. We don't have to pretend it's perfect. We just have to try. He nodded, leaning his forehead against mine. The rain soaked us both, cold and relentless, but somehow it felt cleansing, a baptism of sorts. That night, as I lay in bed beside Noah, I thought about Daniel's words. The past wasn't gone. It would never truly disappear. But for the first time, I realized that love could exist in the tension, in the uncertainty, in the fear, and still feel like a sanctuary. I whispered into the dark, "We'll face it, together." And somewhere deep inside, I felt him agreeing, even without words. But as the days went on, the tension remained, subtle but persistent. Daniel would occasionally disappear without explanation, and calls from his office became more frequent and urgent. I noticed the way he sometimes flinched at certain news stories, or stiffened when old acquaintances came into view. The world outside the mansion, the legal threats, the remnants of old betrayals, was creeping back in. I wanted to believe that our bond was unshakable. I wanted to believe that love could be enough. But deep down, I knew the story was shifting. And that storm we had brushed past on the balcony, it was only just beginning. The days after our confession felt fragile. We still shared breakfasts, still laughed over small things, still exchanged glances that meant more than words. But the easy rhythm had fractured. There was a hesitance now, a subtle pause before he spoke, a way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed it first in the mornings, when he would stand by the window, coffee in hand, staring out at the gardens as if calculating something I couldn't see. I tried to tell myself it was stress, business worries, the remnants of the corporate world he couldn't escape. But something in my gut whispered otherwise. Then came the small inconsistencies. A phone call he answered in hushed tones, ending abruptly when I entered the room. A file left carelessly on the desk, marked with names I didn't recognize. Late nights when I thought he was working in his study, only to find the rooms empty, the mansion silent, except for the faint echo of doors closing somewhere beyond my sight. I began noticing patterns that didn't make sense. Daniel, the man who had always been honest with me, who had held my hand through my confessions, who had promised no more secrets, was keeping something. And I knew it. It hit me one evening when I went to tidy the study. His laptop was open, screen glowing in the dim light. I hadn't meant to look. I told myself that over and over. But curiosity, maybe fear, drew me closer. There it was. Emails, arrangements, conversations. A name repeated over and over. Her name. The color drained from my face. My hands shook as I closed the laptop, as if the motion could erase what I had seen. I couldn't breathe. How could he? The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I felt my chest tighten, my heart thudding in a rhythm that wasn't mine. Everything, every gentle glance, every shared laugh, every stolen moment, now felt fragile, possibly false. That night I barely slept. I lay in my small bedroom, Noah asleep beside me, and stared at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster, as my mind traced the cracks in my heart. I replayed our conversations, every word now suspect. Every touch, every whispered, "I care about you." Had it been real, or had I been living in a beautiful illusion? I thought about running, leaving before the truth came fully to light. But I also knew that running now would feel like admitting defeat. And somehow, I couldn't. The confrontation was inevitable. The next morning, I waited in the kitchen. He appeared, carrying coffee, oblivious to the storm I carried in silence. "Morning," he said softly, placing the mugs down. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His brow furrowed. "Is everything okay?" I drew in a deep breath. "No, everything is not okay. I saw the messages, the emails. Her name, Daniel. Who is she?" His expression changed instantly, from calm to something unreadable, a mask of control slipping, just enough to reveal tension, regret, fear. "Clara, it's not what you think," he began, voice low. "Then tell me." "I want the truth," I said, heart pounding, tears threatening. I I didn't want you to find out this way," he confessed. "There's a reason. I was trying to protect you, protect us." "Protect us from what?" I asked sharply, though my voice trembled. "You've lied. You've hidden something. I trusted you." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly, as if words could rebuild the crumbling walls. "There was a business partnership years ago with someone I thought I could trust. She resurfaced, and it complicated everything. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to drag you into that mess." Her? And all the emails, the arrangements, the plans I saw? That's your idea of protection? "I never stopped thinking about you," he said, desperation creeping in. "I never lied about that. But I needed time to fix things." But every attempt was fractured, haunted by the knowledge of what I had seen. I began keeping to myself, avoiding his gaze, pretending to focus on cleaning or errands around the mansion. Even Noah sensed the tension. He would ask about Daniel, and I'd force a smile, saying, "He's busy, sweetheart. Don't worry." But I worried, constantly, about the man I loved, the life I had imagined, the fragile bond that now teetered on the edge of collapse. I spent that night alone in the nursery, watching Noah sleep, feeling utterly powerless. My apartment had once been a sanctuary. The mansion was beautiful, but now it felt like a gilded cage. Every corner, every chandelier, every polished surface reminded me of Daniel, of promises, of lies. The world outside seemed cruelly indifferent. Even the city lights, once sparkling and comforting, now looked alien, like they belonged to someone else's life. By morning, I made a decision. I couldn't live in suspicion, couldn't move forward while doubts gnawed at my heart. I packed my son's things quietly, leaving a note on the kitchen counter for Daniel. "I love you, but I need to breathe before the truth destroys us. Clara." I stepped out into the cold morning, holding Noah close. The rain had stopped, leaving droplets glistening on the leaves, and the world seemed quiet, almost apologetic. I didn't know how to start again. I didn't know how to trust. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of clarity. I had to reclaim my life. For Noah, for myself. The mansion loomed behind us, silent and imposing, a reminder of dreams and heartbreak. And as we walked away, hand in hand, I whispered a promise to the dark sky. "We'll rise again. Somehow we have to." The first few days after leaving the mansion were quiet, almost painfully so. No Noah's laughter echoing in vast hallways. No Daniel's distant, thoughtful presence. Just the hum of our small apartment, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional breeze brushing through the window. At first, it felt like a void. I kept replaying everything in my mind: the laughter, the rain-soaked balcony, the stolen moments that had felt like eternity. And then, inevitably, the betrayal, the emails, the hidden truths. But slowly, something began to shift. I started small. Morning walks with Noah became our sacred ritual. The park, with its damp earth and glistening leaves, felt like a new world, one we could claim entirely for ourselves. I brought him sandwiches for lunch and watched him chase pigeons, his laughter rising like music that filled the spaces I hadn't realized were empty. I began drawing again, sketching the park, the trees, Noah's little hands clutching mine. Every stroke of pencil, every shade of gray, became a meditation, a way to reclaim my peace, even if just for a few minutes each day. And in those moments, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: clarity. Letters became my secret refuge. I wrote to Daniel, not to send, at least not yet. I poured everything onto paper: the anger, the longing, the hurt, and the love that refused to vanish. I forgive you, not because I fully understand, but because I choose to free myself from the weight of it all. I love you, even with all the shadows, and I hope one day we can find a path back to each other. Folding the letters carefully, I placed them in a drawer. They were mine, not meant for anyone else. And somehow, writing them made the world feel lighter. Then came the day I received a message. It was short, simple. "I'm sorry, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. I could feel the old pull, the warmth, the hope, the memories, tugging at my chest. But I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I took Noah to the park. We sat by the fountain, watching the sunlight scatter across the rippling water. And for the first time, I realized that life didn't have to be about rushing back to what broke us. It could be about moments like these, small, tender, holy hours. That evening, I finally replied, "We can talk. But we need to be honest this time. No shadows, no secrets, only the truth." The reply came quickly: "Only the truth." And in that exchange, I felt a fragile hope. Not certainty, not perfection, but the possibility of healing. When we finally met, it wasn't in the mansion. We chose a quiet cafe, sunlight spilling across the tables, the smell of coffee and fresh bread grounding us in reality. Daniel looked different, older, perhaps, or simply more human. The armor of the billionaire businessman was softened, replaced by a man who carried his mistakes openly, willing to be seen. "Clara," he began, voice gentle, "I know I failed you. I failed to protect what mattered most, you and Noah. And I can't change the past. But I can try, if you'll let me." I studied him, the lines on his face, the weight in his eyes, the sincerity in his hands as they rested on the table. "Daniel, I can't erase what hurt me. I can't forget, but I can decide how I move forward. And I want that forward to include you, if we can truly be honest." He nodded, the relief in his face almost palpable. "No more shadows," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed him. The days that followed were slow, deliberate steps toward rebuilding trust. We shared breakfasts, walks, and small gestures that weren't grand but spoke volumes. Daniel met Noah's bedtime routine with tenderness, reading stories and telling silly jokes, learning the rhythm of our little life. We laughed more than we had in months. And when tears came, mine or his, they were met with understanding not judgment. I began to realize that love wasn't the absence of hurt. It wasn't the lack of betrayal, the perfect timing, or a life without mistakes. Love was the courage to stay, to forgive, to choose each other every day, even when it was hard. One afternoon, I watched Daniel help Noah build a fort out of couch cushions. "Look, Mom, he's the best fort builder ever," Noah shouted, beams of pride in his eyes. I laughed, tears springing to my eyes as I watched them together. Daniel glanced at me, a quiet understanding passing between us. No words were necessary, and in that moment, I understood the lesson life had been teaching me all along. Strength wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about facing it, learning from it, and still choosing love. Months later, as I sat by the same park fountain where I had taken Noah after leaving the mansion, I reflected on everything: the storm, the secrets, the heartbreak, the love that had nearly slipped away. I realized that our story, messy, imperfect, and raw, was still ours, and that sometimes the greatest transformations come not from escaping the past, but from embracing it, scars and all. Noah tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, can we feed the ducks?" I smiled, holding his hand. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's go." And as we walked, I felt the quiet certainty of survival, of hope, of love rebuilt. The mansion, the secrets, the tears. They were all behind us. What lay ahead wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was ours, and that, I realized, was more than enough. The weeks that followed were quiet, gentle, and intentional. Daniel and I weren't rushing. We weren't trying to erase the past or force perfection. Instead, we built slowly, day by day, moment by moment. Breakfasts with Noah became sacred. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, coffee steaming in mismatched mugs. Evenings were filled with small rituals: reading stories, playing board games, or just sitting together in the fading light, talking about nothing and everything. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. One afternoon, Daniel and I found ourselves in the park, the same place where I had once sent Noah running through puddles while I tried to hold myself together after discovering the emails. "Do you remember this spot?" he asked quietly, taking my hand. "Every puddle, every bench," I replied, smiling despite the memories. He squeezed my hand gently. "I can't promise that life will be perfect, Clara," he said, "but I can promise that I will be honest, always, and that I will choose you and Noah every single day." I felt tears prick at my eyes. I don't need perfect. I just need you, fully, openly, and with all your heart. And I need to be the same for you. And in that shared promise, the weight I had carried for months began to lift. We started planning small things together, marking our calendars with little joys instead of obligations. Picnics, small trips, lazy Sunday mornings. We learned to laugh at the mistakes, the awkward moments, and the moments of uncertainty that life inevitably delivered. Noah thrived in this space of love and stability. He felt safe, cherished, and included, not just in our daily routines, but in the emotional life we shared. Seeing him laugh freely again, without shadows lurking behind our smiles, became a source of quiet, immeasurable joy. I realized that love, in its truest form, wasn't just romance. It was patience. It was trust rebuilt after it had been broken. It was holding hands in the dark and still choosing to stay. I found strength I didn't know I had. Strength in forgiveness, in facing fears, and in acknowledging my own worth. And Daniel, he showed me that even someone with a complicated past could learn to be present, to be accountable, to love fully. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the city. Daniel and I sat on the rooftop of my small apartment building. "Look at that," he said softly, pointing to the skyline. "It's beautiful," I replied. "It's not the mansion or the wealth or the titles. It's just life, messy, imperfect, and ours." I nodded, leaning my head on his shoulder. The wind carried the faint scent of rain from earlier that day, mixing with the warmth of his coat. "I've learned something," I said, "that happiness isn't about escaping the past. It's about embracing it, scars and all, and still choosing to move forward." He smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. "I've learned the same, and I promise I won't hide anything again. No shadows, no secrets, only us." Weeks turned into months. Daniel and I celebrated small victories: Noah's school achievements, quiet anniversaries of milestones in our relationship, even the simple act of surviving heartbreak and betrayal. We laughed more than we had ever thought possible, and we held each other in moments of vulnerability, letting the past exist without letting it control us. Through this, I realized the ultimate lesson: life doesn't offer perfect love stories. It offers imperfect people who are willing to try again and again despite the pain, the loss, and the mistakes. And sometimes, the love that endures is not the one that started flawlessly, but the one that grows stronger in spite of it all. One afternoon, Noah tugged me toward the park, his little hand warm in mine. "Mom, look," he shouted, pointing at a small fountain where ducks were splashing. I smiled, watching him laugh, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. Daniel's hand brushed against mine, and I let it stay there, solid, grounding, unwavering. I realized that the mansion, the wealth, the secrets, they no longer mattered. What mattered was here, now, in the ordinary, messy, breathtakingly human life we were building together. And in that ordinary life, I finally understood the true meaning of love. It was courage. It was forgiveness. It was the quiet, steady choice to be present, even when the world tried to tear you apart. And as I held Noah's hand and felt Daniel's steady presence at my side, I knew this was more than enough. That night, I journaled quietly while Noah slept, the soft hum of the city outside filling the room. I survived heartbreak. I survived betrayal. And I survived fear. I learned to forgive, to trust, to love again. And now I am free. Not because life is perfect, but because I am strong enough to make it ours, imperfect and real. I closed the notebook and looked at Daniel, who was sitting across the room, sketching quietly, lost in thought. I whispered into the quiet, "We'll be okay. We'll be more than okay. We'll be us." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it.